All right, now we're going to talk about two types of interest groups: corporatist representation and pluralist representation. And this often confuses students. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to DM me on Discord or leave a comment down below. So let's get started. So what are the characteristics of corporatist interest group representation? Well, the government in these systems controls access to policymaking by relying on state-sanctioned groups, state-run groups, also known as single-peak associations for the most part. And they're the ones who are representing the labor, the business, and the agriculture sectors, the nitty-gritty of the labor within the country. So a government group is representing the citizens. And this is considered centralized decision making. Makes sense. And policy making is often centralized and will involve a very low number of stakeholders, such as government officials, business leaders, and labor representatives. So the top of the top, the elites, they're the ones who are having any say-so in the interest groups. And they're the ones who are directly involved in the politics. Not the average everyday citizen, not the average everyday farmer or cashier or laborer. They're not the ones directly involved in this organization. Their say-so is on the behalf of these leaders and representatives and government officials. So it's very centralized. They emphasize cooperation and collaboration among key groups, and these stakeholders often work together to reach consensus on policy issues. So they're working with one another. They're not working with the individuals that are in their businesses. And for the most part, corporatist representation may limit participation to a select few influential groups. It's not very broad, it's not very diverse. They may prioritize stability and efficiency in policymaking to avoid gridlock instead of waiting things out. They may be very quick in their actions. And the state overall retains more control over actual citizen input. So let's look at Islamic labor councils. So Islamic labor councils represent the interests of workers and laborers in various economic sectors. It's an example of corporatist representation. They're formally recognized by the government and operate under the supervision of the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. They're a channel through which the government will directly communicate with workers and address labor-related issues with these top individuals and government officials. They negotiate collective agreements, wage policies, and labor regulations on behalf of the workers, and they're doing this at a national level, not a local level, not a regional level, a federal, national level. Their activities are tightly controlled by the state, and dissent is often, for the most part, suppressed. So these interest groups are incorporated into the state's political system, into the state apparatus, to manage social and economic affairs that are in line with the government's objectives. Now let's look at pluralist representation, which is essentially the opposite of corporatist representation. So pluralist systems promote competition among autonomous groups, not linked to the state. So that's the big difference here. That's one of the big things that College Board may ask you on the AP exam, is that pluralist systems are not linked to the state, particularly not as much as corporatist systems. We have many different interests. It's way more diverse. We see a lot more smaller groups that want to influence government policy. Power is split among these many groups that will compete for the chance to influence the government's decision-making. And this is more prominent within democracies, of course. They encourage voluntary discussion and autonomy of groups from the government. They emphasize equal access to the political process. All interest groups can participate, voice their concerns, and advocate for their interests, regardless of their size. They don't have to be too big or their resources. They don't have to be too wealthy either. They don't have to be the top-notch business owners. We can have the average day laborer, the average day farmer in these organizations and access to influencing the policy making within the country. Power is dispersed. It's not as concentrated. It's not centralized. It's diffused among various groups. This prevents any single group from dominating policymaking in the decision-making processes. Not a single group has so much power. It's diffused. And this helps prevent tyranny and ensures the diverse perspectives that are considered. So an example here would be the Confederation of British Industry. So this is the CBI. It's a business organization. Very commonly, interest groups are business organizations. You'll come to see this if you learn more about it. And they're a voice for British businesses, advocating for policies that promote economic growth, competitiveness, and investment. It provides a platform for businesses of all kinds to express their views and concerns and priorities to policymakers and legislators. They've engaged in lobbying and advocacy efforts to influence policy and decisions on issues that affect businesses and society as a whole, such as infrastructure, taxation, regulation, and trade. It operates independently from the government. It's not overseen directly by the government, and it represents a diverse amount of interests and has a diverse amount of members from all kinds of backgrounds, such as large corporations and small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as industrial associations. And they play a very crucial role in shaping economic policy debates and promoting the interests of the business community within the UK. Now, Mexico is pretty important because, as we know, they're democratizing and they're seeing a transition. So interest group systems can change over time. And this is represented by Mexico's transition from a corporatist system to a pluralist system. And this is obviously evidence of democratization. And this is evidenced by their greater diversity, competition, and autonomy among interest groups. Interest groups have been around, and they used to be organized into formalized structures that closely aligned to the PRI ruling party. Remember, they were the dominant party in the executive branch for 71 years in the 20th century, and they were known as official unions, and they were controlled directly by the government and played a huge role in managing policies. And this transition has essentially eliminated that and diminished that. And the transition has been driven by factors like democratization, economic liberalization, and social mobilization. A lot of sensations there. As Mexico's political landscape has become more open, competitive, and diverse, and has changed over time, we've seen the emergence of new interest groups, new prominent and influential interest groups that represent a diverse amount of interests, such as labor and business and environmental advocacy, human rights, and social justice. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It's free, which means it costs $0, and it really does help me out. Leave a comment down below with any questions. I'll be happy to answer them. There's some links down below in the description with practice tests, key terms, guided notes, all that fun stuff. Head on over to the next AP Comparative video on some really cool political stuff.